I remember the day the enemy fell silent. It was not a glorious thing. There were no bells ringing across the ruins, no hymns of victory rising from our cracked lips. We stood in what remained of Hive Tertius, a blackened skeleton of twisted metal and shattered rockcrete that had once housed 6 million souls, and we waited for the next wave of attackers that never came. The silence itself was wrong. For 3 months we had grown accustomed to the constant percussion of war, the crack of las fire, the thunder of artillery, the screaming of the wounded and the dying. The air had always carried the sharp ozone smell of energy weapons and the copper-sweet reek of blood. But that morning, as the grey dawn filtered through the smoke-choked sky, there was nothing. Just wind moving through hollow buildings, carrying ash like snow. We held our positions along the eastern ridge, what command had designated Defense Line Sigma 7. My las rifle was still hot in my hands, the barrel discolored from overuse, the power pack down to its last quarter charge. My fingers ached from holding the trigger guard, my shoulders burned from the weight of the flak armor that had saved my life 12 times and failed my brothers 100 more. Private Kellick spoke first, his voice hoarse from breathing promethium fumes. "They've stopped." "Quiet in the ranks," Sergeant Vole barked, but his eyes scanned the horizon with the same confusion we all felt. The enemy had been relentless, inhuman. They had thrown themselves against our lines with suicidal determination, and we had killed them by the thousands, until the no-man's land between us was a carpet of corpses 3 bodies deep. Then they simply stopped. We waited through that morning in parade rest, our weapons trained on attack vectors that remained empty. The sun climbed higher, turning the ash clouds orange, then sickly yellow. Some of the men whispered prayers to the God Emperor. Others simply stared, their eyes hollow with exhaustion and something deeper, a kind of spiritual numbness that comes from killing, until killing becomes the only reality you know. It was mid-afternoon when Commissar Vrenko emerged from the command bunker, his black greatcoat somehow still immaculate despite the filth that covered everything else. He carried a data slate in one hand, his bolt pistol holstered at his hip, a reminder of the Emperor's justice that was never far from our thoughts. His face was unreadable, angular and sharp like the aquila on his cap. "Attention!" Sergeant Vole called, and we snapped to as best we could. Some of us swayed with fatigue. Trooper Dresch had to lean on his rifle to stay upright. The Commissar's eyes swept over us, what remained of the Tertius 88th Infantry Regiment. We had been 400 strong when we'd garrisoned this sector. Now we numbered 63. 63 soldiers in flak armor, held together with tape and faith, our lasguns held together with the same. "I have received an astropathic transmission," Commissar Vrenko announced, his voice carrying the clipped precision of Shola progenium training. "The enemy has been defeated, total collapse across all fronts, the sector is pacified, the Emperor's will be done." He paused, and for a moment, just one moment, I thought I saw something like relief flicker across his face. Then it was gone, replaced by the iron mask of duty. "Our orders," he continued, "remain unchanged. We are to hold this position, maintain combat readiness, and await further instruction from Sector Command." He looked at each of us in turn. "The war may be won, but a soldier's duty is never complete. We will continue our watch. We will honor those who have fallen by remaining vigilant. We will prove ourselves worthy of the Emperor's grace through perfect obedience." "Yes, Commissar," we shouted, our voices thin and ragged in the dead air. He dismissed us back to our posts, and we returned to watching empty ruins for an enemy that would never come. At the time, I thought we would be relieved within days. A week at most. The Departamento Munitorum would process the victory reports, issue new deployment orders, and transport ships would arrive to carry us to our next war or our long-deserved rest. I did not know then what I know now, as I speak these words into the darkness of this tomb we once called a garrison. The relief never came, further instruction never arrived, and we, loyal soldiers of the Imperium, would die here in the ruins of Hive Tertius, still waiting for orders that would never be given, still obeying the last command that would echo through the years of our slow extinction. The Emperor protects, they taught us, but they never said he remembers. The first week after the silence, we maintained discipline with religious fervor. We ran our patrol routes through the corpse-strewn hab blocks at dawn, noon, and dusk, 3-man fire teams moving through streets where the dead outnumbered the living by ratios I could not calculate. The bodies had begun to bloat in the heat, splitting open like overripe fruit, releasing gases that made us gag even through our rebreathers. Flies arrived in biblical swarms, black clouds so thick they blotted out the sun. We walked through them with our eyes nearly shut, feeling them crawl across our faces into our ears, seeking the moisture in the corners of our mouths. Sergeant Voll insisted we maintain proper sector sweeps, checking every building, every basement, every collapsed tunnel for enemies that were not there. Standards must be upheld, he would say, echoing the Commissar's words. We are soldiers of the Imperium, not scavengers, so we swept the ruins with the same thoroughness we had shown during the war, our boots crunching over broken glass and spent shell casings, our rifles trained on shadows that held nothing but rats. By the second week, our supplies began to run critically low. The emergency rations we had been living on, compressed protein bars that tasted like sawdust and despair, were meant to last 3 days in combat conditions. We had been stretching them for months, and now the crates in our supply depot were nearly empty. Quarter rations became eighth rations, then 16th. The water purification tablets were gone, forcing us to drink from the runoff that collected in shell craters, cloudy liquid that tasted of chemicals and left our throats burning. I watched men grow thin, their faces becoming skulls wrapped in grey skin. The flak armor that had once fit snugly now hung loose on frames that seemed to shrink daily. Our movements became slower, more deliberate, each action requiring conscious effort as our bodies began to consume themselves for fuel. Private Hensk was the first to break. It was during morning muster, the 3rd week into our vigil. We stood in formation in the central plaza of our defensive sector, a space of cracked ferrocrete, dominated by a toppled statue of some long-forgotten imperial saint. Commissar Vrenko was conducting inspection, walking down the line with his hands clasped behind his back, examining each soldier with eyes that never blinked. Hensk was standing 2 positions to my left. I heard him shift his weight, heard his breathing quicken. When the Commissar passed him, Hensk spoke. "Sir, permission to ask a question." Commissar Vrenko stopped, turned. His face remained expressionless. "Granted, when—" Hensk's voice cracked. He swallowed, tried again. "When will we be relieved, sir? The war is over. Surely command will send transport soon. Surely they haven't forgotten us?" The Commissar finished the sentence with the precision of a blade finding flesh. "Is that what you were going to say, Private?" The silence that followed felt like a physical weight pressing down on all of us. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in my ears, could hear the wind whistling through the ruins, could hear nothing else because every man in that formation had stopped breathing. "I only meant—" Hensk began. The bolt pistol appeared in Commissar Vrenko's hand with practiced speed. He did not aim, did not hesitate. The weapon spoke once, a crack of thunder that echoed off the dead buildings, and Hensk's head came apart in a spray of red mist and bone fragments. The body stood for a moment swaying before it collapsed onto the ferrocrete with a wet sound that would haunt my dreams. "Defeatist talk," the Commissar said, his voice level, as if he had done nothing more significant than swat a fly. "Doubt is the gateway to heresy. Questions breed weakness. weakness invites corruption. He holstered his weapon and continued down the line, examining the rest of us as if nothing had happened. This soldier forgot the first principle of imperial service. Ours is not to question, but to obey. When he finished inspection, he ordered 4 of us to remove the body. We carried what remained of Private Hensk to the mass grave at the edge of our perimeter, a crater from an artillery shell that now held 73 bodies from our regiment. We had stopped marking individual graves after the first month of fighting. There were too many dead and too few of us left to dig. We laid Hensk among his brothers, and Corporal Dresch said a prayer from the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer. The same prayer we had said 73 times before. The words had lost all meaning, becoming nothing but sounds we made because the ritual demanded it. That night, I lay in my bedroll in the corner of a half-collapsed HAB unit and listened to men crying in the darkness. Quiet sobs, muffled by hands or blankets, the sound of souls breaking under the weight of duty and starvation and the terrible understanding that was beginning to dawn on all of us. No one was coming. The Vox remained silent except for static. The sky remained empty of transport ships. The only movement in Hive Tertius was us, 62 soldiers holding a defensive position against an enemy that no longer existed, following orders that would never change, waiting for relief that would never arrive. But we could not say these things aloud, could not even think them too loudly, lest the thoughts show on our faces and the Commissar's pistol find us next. So we continued our patrols through streets of corpses, continued our watch rotations, staring at horizons that remained empty, continued our morning musters, standing a little straighter despite our weakness, proving through our obedience that we were still worthy of the Emperor's grace. The Emperor protects those who obey, we told ourselves. Even as our flak armor began to rust from the moisture we could no longer keep clean, even as our flesh withered and our strength faded, even as the certainty grew in our bellies, cold and heavy as a stone, that we would die here in these ruins, still waiting, still faithful, still forgotten. By the 6th month, we had become something less than human. Half our number lay in the mass grave now, 31 souls who had survived the war only to perish in the peace that followed. Starvation took most of them. Their bodies simply gave out, vital organs shutting down one by one until they collapsed during patrol or fell asleep and never woke. Others succumbed to infected wounds that we lacked the Medicae supplies to treat. I watched Trooper Callis die over the course of 4 days from a cut on his hand that turned septic, the flesh blackening and swelling until the rot climbed past his elbow and the fever cooked his brain. He screamed scripture at the end, passages from the uplifting primer recited in a voice that no longer sounded human. Some drank the contaminated water despite our warnings, desperate with thirst, and died vomiting blood and bile. Others simply sat down one day and refused to stand again, staring at nothing with eyes that had seen too much and could no longer process the world around them. The Commissar executed 3 for dereliction of duty. The rest we buried with the honors they deserved, which is to say we dragged them to the pit and said the prayer that had become as meaningless as our vigil. We consolidated our forces into a single position, an administratum building at the heart of our defensive sector. It was one of the few structures still relatively intact, a 5-story monument to imperial bureaucracy built from reinforced rockcrete that had withstood the shelling better than most. The windows were blown out, the upper floors partially collapsed, but the bones of it remained strong. We fortified the ground floor with rubble and scavenged metal, set up firing positions covering all approach vectors, and moved our remaining supplies into what had once been the central filing chamber. 31 soldiers in a building designed to house 300 administrators. Our footsteps echoed through empty halls lined with data terminals that no longer functioned and filing cabinets filled with records of a civilian population that no longer existed. Sometimes I would glimpse movement in the corners of my vision, shadows that seemed to move with purpose through doorways and down corridors. But when I turned to look, there was never anything there. Just dust motes floating in the pale light that filtered through the broken windows and the sound of wind moving through hollow spaces. Commissar Vrenko insisted we maintain full military protocol despite our diminished numbers. Morning muster at 0600 hours, formation in the main hall, where our voices would bounce off the walls and multiply, making 31 sound almost like a proper garrison. Roll call consumed 10 minutes now, each name called out and answered with a hoarse affirmation of continued existence. Corporal Dresch, present, sir. Private Vin, present, sir. Sergeant Vole, present, sir. On and on the litany of the surviving, our voices growing weaker with each passing week, but never failing to answer when called. To miss muster was to invite the commissar's attention, and we had all learned what that meant. After roll call came inspection. We would stand at attention while Commissar Vrenko examined our equipment with the same meticulous care he had shown when we were a full-strength regiment. Our lasguns were to be cleaned and maintained daily, our flak armor wiped down, our boots polished to a shine that was impossible to achieve with nothing but spit and ash. Standards must be upheld, the commissar would intone, his voice carrying through the empty building like a liturgy. We are soldiers of the Imperium, our discipline is our strength, our obedience is our salvation. The God Emperor watches, and he demands perfection from his servants. He was growing thinner too, I noticed. The black greatcoat hung differently on his frame, and the sharp angles of his face had become more pronounced, the skin stretching tight over the skull beneath. But his eyes remained hard and bright with fanatical conviction, and his hand never wavered when it held the bolt pistol. We polished our equipment with rags torn from the uniforms of the dead. We stood for inspection with spines straight and eyes forward, ignoring the growling of our empty stomachs and the weakness in our legs. We presented ourselves as proper soldiers of the Imperium, even as we wasted away in that tomb of bureaucracy and blind faith. It was Sergeant Vole who finally spoke the thought that had been growing in all our minds. It was after evening muster, in the brief hour before we assumed our night watch positions. Vole approached the commissar in the main hall where Vrenko was studying a tattered map of the hive sector, as if strategic planning still mattered in a war that had ended half a year ago. Sir, Vole began, his voice careful, measured. Permission to speak freely. The commissar looked up from his map. Granted. Sir, our supplies are exhausted. Our men are dying. Perhaps we might send a runner to the nearest Imperial outpost to establish contact with Sector Command, to request. The bolt pistol was out and firing before Vole could finish the sentence. The explosion of the bolt round in that enclosed space was deafening, a physical force that slapped against my eardrums and left them ringing. Vole's chest disappeared in a spray of blood and bone fragments that painted the wall behind him in a pattern like some obscene fresco. His body crashed backward, the map fluttering from the table to land across his ruined torso like a shroud. Commissar Vrenko holstered his weapon with mechanical precision. When he spoke, his voice was perfectly calm, as if he had done nothing more than correct a minor error in protocol. Potential desertion, he said. The sergeant sought to abandon his post, to flee the duty that the God Emperor himself has assigned to us. He looked at each of us, the 30 remaining soldiers who had witnessed this execution. His eyes were fever bright, burning with something that might have been madness or might have been the purest form of faith. In the Imperium, there is often no difference between the two. We are not abandoned, he continued, his voice rising to fill the empty halls, echoing back at us from a dozen directions. We are the chosen. We are the faithful. We hold this position because it is the Emperor's will that we hold it. To question this is to question him, To doubt is to invite damnation. He stepped over Vol's corpse without looking down, his boots leaving red footprints on the dust-covered floor. We will continue our watch. We will maintain our discipline. We will prove ourselves worthy through perfect obedience. And when the God Emperor deems us ready, when we have demonstrated sufficient faith, then, and only then, will he grant us relief or rest or whatever reward the faithful deserve. He dismissed us to our posts, and we went like automatons, too frightened and too exhausted to do anything but obey. We dragged Vol's body to the mass grave in the darkness, adding him to the pile of the faithful dead. Corporal Dresch said the prayer. The words meant nothing now. We had said them too many times for them to carry weight anymore. That night, standing watch in a third-floor window overlooking the dead city, I understood with terrible clarity what we had become. We were ghosts haunting a garrison that no longer had purpose. We were the forgotten, performing rituals of duty for an imperium that had moved on without us. We were 30 souls trapped in the machinery of military protocol, grinding ourselves to nothing in service of orders that would never change, and we would continue, because to stop would be to admit the truth that would earn us the Commissar's bolt round. We were abandoned. We were forsaken. We were already dead, but no one had told us we could stop serving. Hunger makes animals of men and animals of something worse. I do not wish to speak of what happened in the 8th month, but this is a confession, and confessions demand truth, no matter how it burns the tongue to tell it. The God Emperor sees all, knows all, and if there is any accounting to be made for what we did, let it be made here in these words, while I still possess the capacity for shame. The rations had been gone for weeks. We had scoured every building in our sector, pried open every sealed door, descended into every basement and sub-level searching for overlooked supplies. We found nothing. The hive had been stripped clean during the war. By civilians fleeing the fighting, by soldiers from both sides foraging for sustenance, by the simple entropy of a city being torn apart by months of urban combat. We tried to sustain ourselves on what we could scavenge. Rats, at first. The ruins teemed with them, fat creatures that had grown sleek feeding on the dead. We trapped them, cooked them over small fires made from furniture we broke apart for fuel. The meat was stringy and tasted of rot, but we ate it and told ourselves we were still civilized men making do with poor provisions. But the rats grew scarce, driven away or eaten into scarcity. We boiled leather from our boots, trying to extract some nutritional value from the hide. We chewed on fabric, on paper, on anything that might trick our stomachs into thinking they were being filled. Some of the men ate dirt, packing their mouths with ash and dust until they vomited black bile. We were 23 now, 23 walking skeletons in rotting flak armor, our skin hanging loose on frames that seemed to shrink daily, our eyes sinking deep into our skulls. Every movement required monumental effort. Standing for morning muster left us gasping and dizzy. The patrol routes had been shortened to simple circuits of the administratum building because we no longer had the strength to venture farther. It was Private Wendell who found the bodies in the sub-basement. He had been searching the lower levels, areas we had avoided because they had flooded during the fighting, the water black and stagnant and thick with chemicals from ruptured storage tanks. But desperation drives men to places they would otherwise shun, and Wendell had waded through that poisonous soup hoping to find sealed emergency supplies. Instead, he found the dead, a squad from our regiment that had been trapped in the lower levels during an enemy assault 4 months prior. We had presumed them dead, killed in action, and had long since stopped searching. But there they were, sealed in a storage chamber where the flooding had preserved them. The cold water and chemical contamination had prevented the worst of decomposition. They looked almost peaceful, lying there in their uniforms, their weapons still clutched in their hands. Wendell brought the news to Commissar Vrenko. I was present when he made his report. Standing guard at the Commissar's makeshift office on the second floor, I watched Vrenko's face as Wendell described what he had found, watched something flicker behind those fever-bright eyes, a calculation cold and terrible. "How many?" the Commissar asked. "8, sir, all intact. The water preserved them." Vrenko was silent for a long moment, staring at the wall where he had pinned the regimental standard, a piece of torn fabric that had once been crimson and gold, now faded to brown and grey. When he spoke, his voice was distant, as if he were reciting from a regulation manual he was reading in his mind. "The Departamento Munitorum Resource Allocation Guidelines, subsection 7, paragraph 43, he said. "In extremist situations where standard supply lines have been disrupted, officers are authorized to requisition all available biomass for the sustenance of combat-effective personnel." He turned to look at Wendell, and there was something in his expression that was both mad and terribly, awfully sane. "This is a necessary requisition of enemy biomass." "Sir," Wendell said carefully, "those are our men, our brothers." "Were our brothers," Vrenko corrected. "Past tense, private. They are deceased. We are alive. The Emperor's will is that we survive to continue our duty. Therefore, we will do what must be done." He called an assembly. All 23 of us gathered in the main hall, swaying with weakness, watching as the Commissar stood before us like a preacher at a pulpit. He explained the situation with clinical detachment. He cited regulations and scripture, weaving together military law and religious doctrine into a tapestry of justification that made the unthinkable seem not just permissible but holy. "We are the Emperor's will made manifest," he proclaimed, his voice rising with fervor. "We endure because he demands it. We survive because our survival serves his grand design. This is not desecration. This is divine providence. The God Emperor provides for the faithful, and he has provided for us through the sacrifice of our fallen brothers. They died serving him. Now they will continue to serve him by sustaining those who still carry out his work." Some of the men wept. Others stared at the floor, their faces grey and hollow. No one objected, no one dared. We went down to the sub-basement in groups, wading through the black water to retrieve the bodies. We carried them up to the ground floor where we had set up a fire pit in what had once been the reception area. The Commissar insisted on ritual. He had us arrange the bodies with respect, removing their identification tags to be preserved, cleaning them as best we could with the foul water. Then he led us in prayer. We stood in a circle around the fire as the Commissar recited passages from the Imperial Creed, his voice echoing through the building, mixing with the crackle of flames and the smell, God Emperor forgive me, the smell of cooking meat. He spoke of sacrifice and duty, of the sanctity of service, of the endless hunger of the Imperium that devours all who serve it and calls that devouring holy. The meat was distributed in portions, equal shares for every soldier. The Commissar ate first, to show us it was permissible, blessed, righteous. Then the rest of us followed, because to refuse would be to question his authority, and we all knew what happened to those who questioned. I cannot describe the taste. My mind has tried to forget it, to bury it deep where memory cannot reach, but it remains. It will always remain. The texture, the flavor, the knowledge of what we were consuming as we forced ourselves to chew and swallow, our stomachs cramping with hunger and revulsion in equal measure. We knew the uniforms, we had pretended not to recognize them when we retrieved the bodies from the water, had averted our eyes from the faces, had told ourselves the lie the Commissar had given us, enemy biomass, necessary requisition the Emperor provides. But we knew. Trooper Halleck, who had taught me how to strip and clean my lasgun in basic training. Private Youth, who had shared his rations with me during the siege. Corporal Brennan, who had sung hymns in a voice like an angel to comfort the dying. We knew, and we ate them anyway, because the alternative was to starve. and starving men will commit any sin to live one more day. The commissar made it a sacrament. Before each meal, and there were 7 more after that first one, the bodies carefully rationed to last as long as possible, he would lead us in prayer. The stench of cooking meat became our incense. The crackle of fat in the fire became our liturgy. We would bow our heads and recite the creed, and then we would eat, and then we would return to our posts as if we were still soldiers, still human, still worthy of the Emperor's grace. Some part of me died in those weeks, some essential piece of my soul that defined me as a man rather than a beast. I felt it wither and fall away like flesh from a corpse, leaving only the hollow shell of duty and obedience. We were 19 now. 4 had refused the meat and died of starvation within days. Their bodies went to the mass grave, and no one spoke of adding them to the rations. Even we had limits, it seemed. Even damnation has its boundaries. But those boundaries were smaller than I had imagined, and growing smaller with each passing day. The Emperor protects, we told ourselves, even as we became the monsters we had once fought against. The Emperor provides, we prayed, even as we consumed our brothers to survive. The Emperor forgives, we hoped, even as we damned ourselves beyond all possibility of redemption. The Vox unit died on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because I had been maintaining a calendar, scratching marks on the wall of my sleeping quarters with a piece of sharpened metal, 1 mark for each day, grouped in clusters of 7. It was a way of holding on to time, of proving that the days still passed in ordered sequence rather than blurring together into one endless moment of suffering. 264 marks on the wall, 37 weeks and 5 days since the war ended. The Vox had been our last connection to anything beyond these ruins. Even when it transmitted nothing but static, even when the channels remained dead and empty, the machine itself was proof that a wider universe existed. Every morning, someone would check it, cycling through frequencies, listening for any sign of Imperial traffic. And every morning there was nothing but the hiss and crackle of dead air. But that sound, that meaningless static, had become holy to us. It was the voice of the Imperium itself, distant and incomprehensible but present. It meant we had not yet been completely severed from the God Emperor's domain. Then on that Tuesday morning, Trooper Vin turned the power knob, and the Vox produced nothing. No static, no hum of active circuits, just silence, absolute and final. He checked the power cells, drained. He replaced them with our last spares, cells we had been hoarding for this exact emergency. Still nothing. The machine spirit had abandoned us, its sacred components corroded beyond function by months of neglect, moisture, and the simple entropy that claims all things in time. Vin brought the news to Commissar Vrenko. We were in the main hall, standing for morning muster. 19 skeletons in rotting armor, swaying in formation like trees in a windstorm. The commissar had been conducting roll call, his voice thin and cracked but still maintaining the cadence of military protocol. "Sir," Vin interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Vox is dead. The machine spirit has departed." Commissar Vrenko stopped mid-sentence. For a long moment he stood perfectly still, and I watched something move across his face, an emotion I could not name. There and gone so quickly I might have imagined it. Then his expression hardened back into the iron mask of duty. "Then we will continue without it," he said simply. "Return to your position, trooper." That was all. No ceremony for the loss of our last link to the Imperium, no acknowledgement of what this meant, just orders to continue, as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The silence that descended on our garrison after that was different from the silence of a dead city. This was a silence of absolute isolation, a void that swallowed sound and meaning and left only the hollow echo of our own voices. We could no longer even pretend that someone might hear us, that our Vox might suddenly crackle to life with orders or acknowledgement or some sign that we were still part of something larger than ourselves. We were alone. Completely, utterly alone. The commissar began to speak more, At first it was during muster and inspection, recitations of regulations, passages from the uplifting primer, tactical doctrine from training manuals we had all memorized years ago. But gradually, it expanded beyond the formal structures of military routine. He would speak to the empty halls as he walked his rounds, his voice drifting through doorways and down corridors, a constant stream of words that seemed to flow from some bottomless well inside him. He recited the complete text of the Imperial Infantryman's uplifting primer from memory start to finish, his voice rising and falling with the rhythm of scripture. When he finished, he would begin again, as if the repetition itself was a form of prayer. Sometimes he would switch to tactical assessments, analyzing defensive positions and fields of fire for a battle that would never come. Other times, he would lecture on the nature of duty and faith, his words growing more abstract, more theological, threading together fragments of imperial creed with half-remembered sermons and his own fevered philosophy. "The soldier is the instrument of the emperor's will," he would say, his voice echoing from some unseen part of the building. "The soldier does not question, does not hesitate, does not doubt. The soldier obeys. In obedience there is purity. In purity there is salvation. We are the blessed, the chosen, the faithful remnant who prove through our suffering that we are worthy of His grace." On and on, without pause, without rest. The words became a constant background hum, like the static from the dead vox, filling the silence with noise that meant nothing and everything simultaneously. It was maddening. It was comforting. It was the only thing that reminded us we had once been soldiers, part of something greater, servants of an empire that spanned the stars. Without those words, without the Commissar's endless recitation of doctrine and duty, we would have had nothing but our own thoughts, and our thoughts had become dangerous things, full of forbidden questions and terrible realizations we dared not speak aloud. We were 14 now. 5 had died in the weeks since we had finished the last of the meat. Our bodies were eating themselves, consuming muscle and organ tissue to stay alive, but there was only so much of us left to consume. We moved like ancient men, bent and shuffling, our joints swollen and painful. Some had lost teeth, the gums too diseased to hold them. Others had developed sores that would not heal, weeping lesions that marked us like stigmata. Corporal Dresch could no longer stand without support. He conducted his watch shift seated in a chair we had dragged to his position, his lasgun propped across his lap, his eyes staring at nothing. Private Wendell had gone blind in his left eye, the socket sunken and dark. Trooper Malik had stopped speaking entirely, responding to orders with nods and gestures as if he had forgotten human language or simply lost interest in using it. And still we maintained our routines. Morning muster at 0600 hours, roll call, inspection, watch rotations every 6 hours. Patrol circuits of the building's perimeter, all the rituals of a functioning military unit performed by dying men in a dead city for an empire that had forgotten we existed. It was Trooper Mex who tried to leave. He had been on night watch, alone on the 3rd floor. When dawn came and he did not appear for muster, we found his post abandoned, his lasgun left behind, propped against the wall. The Commissar's face went very still when he saw the empty position. Without a word, he drew his bolt pistol and walked to the main entrance. We followed, because that was what we did. We followed. We found Mex 200 meters from the building, walking east through the ruins, not running, not fleeing with panic or haste, just walking slowly and deliberately like a man in a trance. "Trooper Mex," the Commissar's voice rang out across the rubble. "Halt and return to your post." Mex stopped, turned. Even from that distance I could see his face, gaunt and hollow but strangely peaceful. He looked at us, at the Commissar, at the Administratum building that had become our tomb. "No," he said, His voice was quiet, but it carried in the still air. No more. The bolt pistol fired. The range was long, but the commissar's aim was perfect. It had always been perfect. Mex's chest exploded, and his body crumpled into the ash like a puppet with cut strings. "Retrieve the body," Commissar Vrenko ordered. "Dereliction of duty. The Emperor's justice is swift and absolute." We dragged Mex back to the building. We did not take him to the mass grave. The Commissar forbade it. "Deserters do not deserve burial with the faithful," he said. So we left the body in the entrance hall, where it would serve as a reminder to any who might harbor similar thoughts. That night, I lay in my sleeping quarters and listened to the Commissar's voice drifting through the darkness, reciting regulations and doctrine to the empty building. The words blurred together, becoming a kind of music, meaningless and eternal. The soldier's duty continues beyond death. The faithful are rewarded in the Emperor's sight. Obedience is the highest virtue. Orders are absolute. Orders are eternal. We serve because service is all we are, all we have ever been, all we will ever be. I closed my eyes and saw Mex walking away through the ruins. Saw the peace on his face in the moment before the bolt round found him. He had tried to leave, tried to break free from the machinery of duty that was grinding us all into dust. And for that moment of defiance, that single moment of choosing his own path, he had been free. Then the Emperor's justice had found him, as it finds all who stray, and he was free no more. Orders are orders. Obedience is everything. The silence between the orders, that terrible vast silence where our own thoughts might exist, must be filled with doctrine and duty and the endless repetition of why we serve. Because if we ever stopped to listen to that silence, if we ever heard what our own souls were screaming in the darkness, we would all walk away into the ruins, and the Commissar could not allow that. So he spoke, and spoke, and spoke, and we listened, because listening was all we had left. My body began its final rebellion in the 10th month. It started with my hands. I woke one morning to find the fingers of my left hand swollen and discolored, the skin tight and shiny like overinflated rubber. The joints would not bend properly, responding to my commands with grinding pain and sluggish reluctance. I assumed it was an infection from some minor cut I had not noticed, a wound sustained during one of our patrol circuits through the rubble. I was wrong. Within days the swelling had spread to my wrist, then my forearm. The skin took on a mottled appearance, purple and black and a sickly yellow-green that reminded me of the corrupted water in the sub-basement. I could smell it, a sweet rotten odor that leaked through my pores and made me gag when I lifted my arm too close to my face. I was not alone in my decay. We were 12 now, 12 animate corpses performing the rituals of soldiers because we had forgotten how to be anything else. Every one of us bore the marks of systemic failure, our bodies shutting down in stages, piece by piece, organ by organ. Trooper Vin's legs had swollen to twice their normal size, the flesh weeping clear fluid through splits in the skin. He could no longer walk, so he crawled to his watch positions, dragging himself across the floor with his arms, leaving wet trails behind him like a slug. Corporal Dresch had developed a cough that produced black phlegm flecked with blood. It racked his body every few minutes, doubling him over with spasms that looked like they might break his spine. Private Wendell, blind now in both eyes, the sockets sunken into his skull like empty wells, sat in a corner of the main hall during daylight hours, rocking back and forth, reciting scripture in a whisper that never stopped. At night he would scream, thrashing against nightmares we could not see, until someone, usually me, would hold him down until the terrors passed. The radiation sickness was the worst. We had been sleeping near the Prometheum storage drums for warmth, huddling close to the metal containers during the cold nights when the temperature dropped and our thin bodies could no longer generate enough heat to keep us alive. We did not know the drums were leaking. did not understand why we felt nauseated and weak after sleeping near them, did not connect the sickness to the source until it was far too late. My hair came out in clumps, leaving my scalp patchy and raw. My gums bled constantly, filling my mouth with the taste of copper. I vomited every morning now, thin yellow bile that burned my throat and left me gasping. The vomiting episodes grew longer, more violent, until I would spend half an hour dry heaving over a corner of the room, my body convulsing with nothing left to expel. But these were the external symptoms, the visible markers of our disintegration. The true horror was internal, invisible, a cascade of cellular breakdown that we could feel but not see. My teeth began to loosen in their sockets. I could wiggle them with my tongue, feel them shift in the diseased gums. One morning, I bit down on a piece of scavenged rat leather, and a molar came free, falling onto my tongue with a sensation that made me retch. I spat it into my palm, a small yellowed thing, the root still attached, dark with rotted blood. I kept it. I do not know why. Perhaps as evidence that I had once been whole, once been human. I carried it in my pocket, and sometimes I would take it out and hold it, this small piece of myself that had died while the rest of me continued. The pain was constant now, not sharp or acute, but a deep, grinding ache that permeated every part of my body, from my bones to my skin to the spaces in between. It felt like I was being crushed very slowly, compressed by invisible forces that were patient and thorough and would not stop until I was reduced to powder. We could no longer stand for morning muster. Commissar Vrenko, who was himself little more than a skeleton wrapped in a tattered greatcoat, acknowledged this reality with the same clinical detachment he applied to everything. Seated formation is permissible in cases of severe injury, he announced, citing some obscure regulation. The form matters less than the adherence to structure. We will continue our muster. We will maintain our discipline. So we sat in the main hall, arranged in rows, propped against walls or slumped in chairs scavenged from the upper floors. The commissar would call roll, and we would answer, our voices thin and raspy, barely audible even in the silence. Corporal Dresch, a wet cough, then, present sir. Private Vin. A wheeze from the floor where he lay, present sir. Private Wendell. Blind eyes staring at nothing, present sir. On and on the litany of the dying, proving through our responses that we still existed, still served, still obeyed. After roll call, the commissar would lead us in recitation of the imperial creed. We would speak the words together, those of us who could still speak, our voices blending into a chorus of rattling breaths and broken syllables. I am a soldier of the Imperium. My life is the Emperor's currency. I spend it without question. I serve unto death and beyond. My faith is my shield. My duty is my sword. I am the instrument of his will. The words had become our reality. We were no longer men. We were instruments, tools, objects that existed only to fulfill the function for which we had been designed, and if that function was to sit in the ruins of a dead city, slowly dying while maintaining the fiction of military readiness, then that was what we would do. Because instruments do not question their purpose, because tools do not choose their use, because objects do not possess will, the commissar promised us that our suffering was holy. He spoke of it constantly now, his voice filling the building during all hours, weaving together theology and doctrine into elaborate justifications for our agony. Every moment of pain is a prayer, he would say, pacing through the halls while we sat in our filth and decay. Every breath drawn in anguish is an offering to the golden throne. The God Emperor watches us, measures us, weighs our faith against our suffering. And when we have suffered enough, when we have proven ourselves worthy through the completeness of our obedience, he will grant us our reward. What reward? Trooper Vin asked one day, his voice barely a whisper. It was the first time anyone had spoken during one of the Commissar's sermons in months. Commissar Vrenko stopped his pacing, turned to look at Vin, who lay on the floor in a pool of his own fluids, his legs rotted to uselessness. "Death," the Commissar said. "Death is the reward, release from service, permission to rest, but only when he deems our duty complete. Only when we have given everything, our strength, our health, our sanity, our lives, can we be allowed to stop serving." He smiled then, and it was the most terrible thing I had ever seen. A skull's grin on a face that had forgotten what genuine emotion looked like. "We are so close," he whispered, as if sharing a sacred secret. "Can you feel it? We are almost worthy, almost pure enough, almost ready for his grace." I believed him. God Emperor, forgive me, I believed him, because belief was all that remained of me. My body was a prison of rotting meat and corroded bone. My mind was a small, frightened thing cowering in the darkness of my skull, but my faith, twisted and corrupted though it had become, was still intact. I believed that our suffering had meaning. I believed that someone was watching, keeping account, measuring our devotion in units of pain and obedience. I believed because the alternative, the truth that we were forgotten, that we died for nothing, that our agony served no purpose beyond the mad convictions of a commissar who had lost his mind months ago, was more unbearable than any physical torment. So we sat in our filth and recited the creed. We answered roll call with voices that barely qualified as human. We maintained our watch rotations, though we could no longer see clearly, could no longer move without agony, could no longer hold our weapons with hands that had become claws of swollen flesh and exposed bone. We were four now, four things that had once been soldiers, reduced to the barest essence of service and suffering. The flesh is weak, the saying goes, the machine is eternal, but we had no machines left, only flesh. Weak, failing, corrupted flesh that continued to breathe and bleed and obey, long past the point where death should have been merciful enough to claim us. We endured because we had forgotten how to stop. We served because serving was all we had ever known. And we waited, through pain that redefined the meaning of the word, through decay that transformed us into living nightmares, for permission to finally be allowed to die. They came on a day I can no longer place in time. The calendar marks on my wall had stopped weeks ago, or perhaps months. I could no longer be certain. Time had lost its linear quality, becoming instead a thick, viscous thing that flowed in strange patterns, pooling in moments of agony and rushing past periods I could not recall. I knew only that we were four, and that the four of us were barely alive, and that we had been waiting in this tomb for an eternity that might have been a year or might have been a lifetime. I was on watch when I first heard them. I had been positioned, more accurately, propped, in a third-floor window overlooking the eastern approach. My post consisted of a chair salvaged from some administrator's office and a lass rifle I could no longer lift. My left arm had become useless, the infection having spread to my shoulder, turning the limb into a swollen, discolored thing that hung from my body like a foreign object imperfectly attached. The sound came from the ruins beyond our perimeter, clicking, chittering, the scrape of something hard against rockcrete. Not human sounds, not the sounds of any creature I had encountered during the war. At first I thought my mind had finally broken, that the fever cooking my brain had conjured auditory hallucinations to accompany the visual ones that had become increasingly frequent. I saw things in the shadows now, figures that moved at the edges of my vision, faces in the patterns of water damage on the walls, hands reaching for me from darkened doorways. But the sounds continued, growing louder, closer, multiple sources converging on our position from several directions. I tried to call out a warning. My voice emerged as a wet croak, barely audible even to myself. I tried again, forcing air through my ruined throat, producing a sound that was more animal than human but carried enough volume to alert the others. Commissar Vrenko appeared in the doorway behind me. He moved with surprising speed considering his condition, though moved was perhaps too generous a word. He lurched, stumbled, caught himself against the doorframe. His greatcoat hung on his skeletal frame like a shroud, the fabric rotted and torn, no longer black but a mottled grey-brown streaked with stains I did not want to identify. His face was a skull with skin stretched tight across it, the flesh translucent enough that I could see the shadows of bone beneath. His eyes, God Emperor, his eyes, burned with an intensity that belonged to neither the living nor the dead, but something caught between the two states, sustained by will alone. "Report," he rasped. I pointed toward the ruins with my good hand, tried to speak, failed, pointed again. The commissar moved to the window, leaned out far enough to see the eastern approach. I watched his body go rigid, watched his hand move to the bolt pistol at his hip, a weapon that had perhaps 3 rounds remaining, possibly fewer. "Xenos," he said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been satisfaction. "The Emperor provides. He has sent us enemies so that we might prove our worth one final time." He turned from the window, moved past me with that lurching, unsteady gait. I heard him descending the stairs, heard his voice echoing through the building, summoning the others to muster. I looked back out the window. They were emerging from the ruins now, visible in the grey morning light. Small creatures, perhaps half the height of a man, with segmented bodies covered in chitinous plates that reflected light like oil on water. They moved on multiple legs, 6, 8, I could not count, with a skittering motion that reminded me of insects magnified to nightmarish proportions. They were not warriors. I understood this immediately, instinctively. These were scavengers, opportunistic creatures that picked through the bones of dead civilizations, harvesting whatever scraps of value might remain. We had seen evidence of their kind during the war. Distant figures moving through contested zones, feeding on the dead when the fighting moved elsewhere. They had come to Hive Tertius seeking salvage, not battle. They had not come for us. They probably did not even know we were here. But we were soldiers of the Imperium, and they were Xenos, and that was all that mattered. I heard the others assembling in the hall below, heard the commissar's voice rising in fervor, not quite shouting but carrying a manic intensity that made the words seem louder than they were. "Fix bayonets. This is what we have waited for. This is why the Emperor kept us here, why he sustained us through months of trial, not to rust away in obscurity, but to die as soldiers, to shed our blood in his service one final time." I tried to stand. My legs would not support me. I toppled from the chair, crashed to the floor, sending spikes of agony through my body that made my vision go white. I lay there gasping, tasting blood, feeling the broken pieces grinding inside me. Hands grabbed me. Trooper Vin dragging himself across the floor with his arms, his ruined legs trailing behind him like dead meat. He pulled me upright, propped me against the wall. His face was unrecognizable, so swollen and distorted that I could barely make out his features. But his eyes held recognition and something like pity. "Can you fight?" he whispered. I wanted to laugh. To fight required the ability to stand, to hold a weapon, to possess even the smallest measure of strength. I had none of these things. None of us did. But I nodded, because that was what soldiers do. We lie about our readiness. We pretend we are capable. We say yes to orders even when every fiber of our being screams no. Vin dragged me to the stairs. We descended together, him pulling with his arms, me sliding down step by step, each impact a fresh agony. Behind us, I could hear the commissar and the others, Corporal Dresch's wet, rattling cough, Private Wendell's blind stumbling as he felt his way along the walls. We assembled in the main hall. 4 soldiers who could barely breathe, let alone fight, standing, or sitting, or lying, in formation one last time. Commissar Vrenko stood before us, and in that moment I saw him as he had been a year ago. Tall, proud, immaculate in his black greatcoat, the aquila on his cap gleaming, his eyes sharp and clear. The image lasted only a second before reality reasserted itself, showing me the truth, a dying man in rotted clothing, sustained by nothing but fanaticism and the absolute conviction that obedience justified any suffering. "Soldiers of the Imperium," he said, his voice cracking with emotion, "our vigil is ended. The Emperor calls us to his side. We go to him not as failures, not as forgotten wretches, but as warriors who never abandoned their post, who maintained their duty until the very end." He drew his bolt pistol. The motion seemed to take enormous effort, his arm trembling with the weight of the weapon. "Fix bayonets," he ordered. I had no bayonet. I had no weapon at all. My last rifle remained upstairs, where I could not retrieve it, but I made the motion anyway, pantomiming the action because the ritual demanded it. Corporal Dresch somehow managed to attach his bayonet with shaking hands. The blade was rusted, the edge dull, but it clicked into place with a sound like a benediction. "For the Emperor," the Commissar said. "For the Emperor," we repeated, our voices thin and broken but speaking in unison for the first time in months. The Xenos came through the walls, not breaking them down, but through gaps and holes that already existed, flooding into the building like water through cracks in a dam. Dozens of them, then hundreds, their chittering filling the air with alien noise that made my teeth ache and my skull feel like it was splitting. We fought. God Emperor, forgive me, we fought. Corporal Dresch managed 3 steps before his legs gave out, but he stabbed upward from the ground, his bayonet piercing the underbelly of a creature that had skittered too close. Black ichor sprayed from the wound, and Dresch was screaming, the litany of hate from the uplifting primer, recited in a voice that bubbled with fluid from his ruined lungs. Private Wendell swung his rifle blind, the stock connecting with chitinous bodies, crushing them, sending them flying. He fought like a man possessed, his sightless eyes turned toward heaven, his mouth open in a continuous scream that might have been prayer or might have been pure rage. Trooper Vin, legless, dying, dragged himself toward the creatures with his hands, grabbing at their limbs, crushing them between fingers that had somehow retained their strength. They swarmed over him, tearing at his flesh, and he laughed, actually laughed, as he pulled them close and squeezed until they ruptured. The Commissar fired his bolt pistol, once, twice, 3 times. Each shot was perfect, detonating a Xenos creature in a spray of alien biology. Then the weapon clicked empty, and he threw it aside, drawing a combat knife I had not known he possessed. He waded into them, stabbing, slashing, reciting deployment codes from a war that had ended a lifetime ago. Grid coordinates and tactical assessments, unit designations and supply requisitions, all the meaningless bureaucracy of military service transformed into a war cry. I could not stand, could not fight, could barely breathe, but I dragged myself forward with my one good arm, pulling my body across the floor toward the mass of chittering, clicking bodies. A Xenos creature turned toward me, its mandibles clicking, its multiple eyes reflecting my face back at me. I saw myself as I truly was, a corpse that had forgotten to die, a broken thing held together by nothing but the echoes of duty and the muscle memory of obedience. I reached for it with my good hand. It tore into me, and I felt nothing, because pain had become so constant that additional suffering registered only as a distant sensation, something happening to a body I no longer fully inhabited. I heard Dresch fall silent, his voice cutting off mid-prayer. I heard Vin's laughter turn into something wet and gurgling, then stop. I heard Wendell collapse with a crash that shook the floor. I heard the Commissar still fighting, still reciting his codes and coordinates, his voice growing fainter as the creatures pulled him down. Grid reference 77903, supply depot, authorization code Omega, enemy strength assessed at I have executed my orders, I have maintained my post, I have. Then silence, not gradual but sudden. Absolute. As if the universe itself had drawn a breath and held it. I lay on the floor in the darkness, feeling the weight of Xenos bodies on top of me, feeling my blood pooling beneath me, feeling my consciousness beginning to slip away like water through my fingers. We had fought, we had obeyed, we had died as the Commissar promised, as soldiers performing our duty, never questioning, never faltering, faithful unto the very end. And the creatures that killed us did not even know we were soldiers, did not recognize us as threats or enemies or warriors worthy of respect. To them, we were just more debris to be cleared away, more salvage in a dead hive full of nothing but garbage and ghosts. I do not know how I still draw breath. If this can be called breath, this wet, rattling wheeze that pulls air through passages that should no longer function, that forces it into lungs that feel more like collapsed bags of fluid than organs capable of sustaining life. Each inhalation is a labor, a conscious effort of will that requires more strength than I possess, yet somehow I continue. In, out, a rhythm older than thought, more fundamental than duty. I cannot see. My eyes are open. I think they are open, though I cannot lift my hands to check, but they perceive only shadows, gradations of darkness, lighter and darker grays that shift and move in patterns that might be real or might be hallucinations born of oxygen deprivation and brain death. Sometimes I think I can distinguish shapes in the darkness, the ceiling above me, the walls, the bodies. The bodies are everywhere. I can feel them pressing against me. The hard, cold shells of the Xenos creatures, their limbs rigid in death, their weight crushing down on my chest and legs, and beneath that, softer things, warmer things, though growing cold. My brothers, Dresh, Vin, Wendell, the Commissar. We lie together in this hall, mixed with our enemies, or what the Commissar called our enemies, impossible to separate now, united in death in a way we never were in life. I cannot move my legs. I know this with a certainty of sensation that has transcended into absence. There is no pain from below my waist, no feeling at all, just a void where my lower body used to exist. Gone. Consumed by the Xenos, or crushed beyond function, or simply dead while the rest of me continues through some perverse miracle or curse. My left arm is gone too. I felt it go during the fighting, felt teeth or mandibles or something sharp sever it at the shoulder, in a moment of white-hot agony that has since faded into numbness. My right arm remains, though I cannot lift it, cannot feel my fingers. It lies across my chest like a piece of driftwood washed up on a beach, present but no longer part of me. Time passes. I cannot measure it, cannot track it. It flows around me in strange currents, sometimes racing past in a blur, sometimes stretching out into eternities where each second contains lifetimes of suffering and awareness. Sometimes I hear sounds from above, footfalls, voices speaking in languages I do not recognize, harsh, guttural sounds that might be human or might be something else. The Xenos return periodically, their chittering and clicking filling the building as they move through the upper floors, harvesting whatever they came here to find. They do not come to the main hall. Perhaps the smell keeps them away, the reek of death and decay that must emanate from this place like a physical barrier. Perhaps they have already taken what they wanted. Perhaps they simply do not care about the ground floor, about the pile of corpses in the entrance hall that includes both their kind and mine. I do not call out. I am still under orders to maintain operational security. The enemy must not know our strength, our position, our status. The Commissar's voice echoes in my memory, reciting regulations about information control and tactical discipline. I must remain silent. I must give them nothing. Even if I wanted to call out, I am not certain I could form words anymore. My tongue lies thick and swollen in my mouth. My jaw feels locked, frozen in place. The muscles that control speech have atrophied or died, leaving me with only the most basic functions: breathe, listen, endure. I wait for relief. The administratum does not forget its soldiers. This is doctrine, this is faith. Somewhere in the vast machinery of the Imperium, in the endless archives and data vaults that span 1,000,000 worlds, there is a record of the Tertius 88th Infantry Regiment. There is a notation of our deployment, our orders, our ongoing mission. Eventually, months from now, years from now, centuries from now, some clerk will notice the discrepancy, will see that we were never formally relieved, never recalled, never marked as lost, and they will send someone to investigate. They will find us here. They will discover that we maintained our post, that we never abandoned our duty, that we remained faithful even unto death and beyond. They will honor us. They will record our service in the great ledgers of the Imperium. They will add our names to the rolls of the martyred, the faithful, the eternally vigilant. Or they will not. The thought comes unbidden, unwanted, a whisper of heresy that I cannot silence. Perhaps there is no record. Perhaps the clerk who filed our deployment orders died in the war. Perhaps the archives that held our information were destroyed in some unrelated conflict on some distant world. Perhaps the entire administrative chain that connected us to the Imperium was severed months ago, and no one noticed, and no one cared, because in an empire of 1,000,000 worlds and uncountable trillions of soldiers, 4 men in a dead hive on a forgotten planet matter less than dust. No, I reject this thought. I cast it out. It is the voice of doubt, the whisper of corruption, the path that leads to damnation. I am a soldier of the Imperium. My life is the Emperor's currency. I spend it without question. I serve unto death and beyond. I am still serving. Even now, lying in the darkness with my body destroyed and my consciousness fading, I am serving. By maintaining my post, by refusing to abandon my duty, by holding this position against all enemies, foreign and domestic, until I receive orders to the contrary. I have not received orders to leave. Therefore, I remain. Days pass, or weeks, or months. I cannot tell anymore. My awareness comes and goes like a tide flowing in and out, each return bringing me to a body that feels less substantial, less real, less connected to the thing I think of as myself. Sometimes I am certain I have died, that what I am experiencing is some form of afterlife or purgatory, a waiting room where souls go before they are judged and sorted, and sent to whatever fate the God Emperor deems appropriate. But I can still feel pain, not the sharp, immediate pain of injury, but a deep, cosmic ache that permeates every atom of my existence. The pain of a body that refuses to die, that clings to life through some combination of stubborn biology and absolute conviction that duty demands survival. I think about the Commissar. His body lies somewhere nearby. I cannot see it, but I know it is there, adding its weight to the pile that crushes me. In death he achieved what he sought in life: perfect obedience, complete sacrifice, absolute proof of faith. He died reciting regulations and deployment codes, died serving, died convinced that his suffering had meaning. Was he right? Does our vigil matter? Did our months of agony and slow death serve any purpose beyond satisfying the mad conviction of a man who could not admit that we had been forgotten? I do not know. I will never know. But I believe, because belief is all I have left. Belief that somewhere, somehow, our service is recorded, that our names are written in some great ledger kept by angels or servitors or the God Emperor himself, that when the final accounting comes, when the universe ends and all debts are tallied, someone will note that the Tertius 88th Infantry Regiment held their post until the very end and beyond. The sounds from above have stopped. The Xenos have moved on, taking whatever they came for, leaving the ruins to silence once more. I am alone now, truly, completely alone. The last soldier in a dead garrison in a dead hive on a world that no longer matters. But I am still a soldier. My legs are gone, but I hold my post. My eyes see only shadows, but I maintain my watch. My voice is silent, but I recite the creed in my mind over and over, an endless loop of prayer and dedication. I am a soldier of the Imperium. My life is the Emperor's currency. I spend it without question. I serve unto death and beyond. The war ended, the others died. The relief never came. But my orders remain: hold this position, maintain combat readiness, await further instruction. I am still waiting. I will wait forever if I must. Even if I am nothing but bones and faith, dust and devotion, I will wait. Even if 1,000 years pass, and I am forgotten by every living soul in the Imperium, I will wait. Even if the Emperor himself has turned his gaze from this forgotten corner of his domain, I will wait. Because I am a soldier, and soldiers obey. Because I am faithful, and faith demands endurance. Because I was given orders, and those orders did not include permission to stop serving. The war ended. Our orders didn't. And so I remain, in the darkness, in the silence, in the ruins of Hive Tertius, holding my post against enemies that no longer come, serving an empire that no longer remembers I exist, waiting, always waiting, forever waiting for orders that will never arrive. Emperor, forgive me, I hold. The end in the grim darkness of the far future. There is only war, and sometimes there is only waiting, and sometimes there is no difference between the two.